Okay, we're up to chapter 13. Only one more left to go for this semester. This chapter 13 is all about subcultures, and I want you to think in terms of marketing and how this understanding of subcultures can be extremely beneficial. So, subcultures mean a group whose members share significant beliefs and common preferences. Over the next 45 years, the Hispanic population is expected to more than double, where the Asian population is expected to double. And many marketers are aware of these changes, and many are not getting it right yet. McDonald's, for example, uses a strategy called leading with ethnic insights, and Ford Explorer is also markets successfully to African Americans. So many companies are strategizing so they can connect with certain um, uh, ethnic backgrounds and make sure that they're doing it right. Especially now, I know McDonald's got some criticism for an ad they recently put out for Black Lives Matter. Um, Watching your wording to connect with an audience is very important. Overusing words, using them in the wrong way, can offend people. So there are subculture stereotypes, of course, and it means that our member in an ethnic, racial, or subculture often guide our consumption choices. So stereotypes aren't always a negative thing. They can be used negatively, but stereotypes kind of help direct people in a certain way. For instance, I have an example here of food choices. Um, I'm Irish and Scottish, and my food choices definitely go less spicy and more into like meat and potatoes. Um, I just, that's how I grew up, versus somebody else who may have grown up in more spicy type foods or different ethnic foods. Um, and that all relates back to our family and our culture and where we come from. Subculture and gender stereotypes. So, outsiders of a group may assume that group members possess certain traits. In the past, it was common for marketers to use things like racial or sexist or ethnic symbolisms as like a shorthand to convey certain product attributes. Before these actions became taboo, they often employed crude and unflattering images of not only African Americans that were depicted as subservient, but certainly Mexicans that were depicted as bandits. Let me show you a little bit. Examples of subcultural and gender stereotypes. So, recently, as in today, PepsiCo, the parent company of Quaker Oats, is taking Aunt Jemima. They're taking that brand and they are redoing it. They are finding that they are kind of, how can I say, they're making this something that it shouldn't be. Um, and they have this stereotype that's just making their company not look like they are caring and understanding of a particular group of people. So they came together and decided that they're going to use just modern mothers, caring people, to be the new Aunt Jemima. And I also think things like Uncle Ben's, and I see the cream of wheat here, will also be changed up. So be on the lookout for that. But PepsiCo and Quaker Oats is the first one to change up their logo as of Black Lives Matter has come into the forefront even more. And I applaud them for that and think it was a good move. Frito-Lay here has, they stopped these ads in 1971 depicting Hispanics as more of like a bandit. This is called the Frito Bandito. Take a look at this old commercial. It's, you know, it's what they did back then. It doesn't mean it's right. It just means that they've changed, and thank God. So, what is acculturation? Acculturation is a process of movement and adaptation to one's country's environment by a person from another country. So, many of you or your parents have come here from a different place, and they had to adapt to the cultural environment. They didn't always adapt great, they still could be adapting. But acculturation occurs with a lot of different influencers and agents. They teach us the way of a culture. So maybe your family or their family came here from somewhere else, and they're with family that have been in the US for some time, and they're learning about the culture through them or through friends or church organizations or even the media, which can help with that process. There is an assimilation or resistance, and marketers need to be aware of this change. So some people are into, our American ways, and others like to stick with what they know and what they've brought up with, especially people that are older and kind of set in their ways. So here's a great example of an agent of acculturation for Latina girls. This is the Princess Elena of Avalor. So this is a way that media is helping children, girls, children connect with their culture, but bringing it a little bit more to modern times. So still under the lines of acculturation, there's a high context culture, and then there's low context culture. And in a high context culture, it means that group members are tightly knit. They infer meanings that go between spoken words. There's symbols and gestures that carry weight, the weight of a message. And many minority cultures fall into this group. You're considered a high context culture versus a low context culture is more literal and straightforward with our messaging. And so that's how important do we think this is as marketers to understand these cultures. And so they have here on this chart on the left is the high context, or more like Middle Eastern, Asia, Africa, Latin America, versus the low context is German, Scandinavia, North America, and then somewhere in the middle is Belgium, Holland, France, and Sweden. They're kind of middle of the road. So think about that in your own culture, and then I want you to think about it in terms of marketing. So Home Depot does a good job here of creating ads for acculturated Hispanics. So they have ads in Spanish, Spanish and English signage at the store. Walmart does a lot of this, and I think it's a smart idea depending on what area you're from too. Certainly down here in South Florida, you're going to come across more Spanish and English signs. The progressive learning model assumes that people gradually learn a new culture as they increasingly come in contact with it. I couldn't agree more. I think to learn about a culture, you have to immerse yourself in it. And when people acculturate, they will blend what they brought from original culture into this new host culture. And acculturation can occur when we relocate from one country to another. It could be one region of the country to a different region. And we think about how do we cope with these feelings of acculturation. So maybe some of you are from the Northeast and you come down here to Florida for school, and there's an acculturation that goes on there. It's a very weather-driven society, more laid back, beachy, different society versus, say, the Northeast or Midwest or, West Coast. And so for me, I'm coming from the Northeast. So I think of how do I cope with this? Well, I might seek out certain foods or restaurants that remind me of the Northeast, or my, ingredients that I like to cook with, something like that, or experiences that I miss or want to still have. Now you can imagine that now if you're coming from a different country. So that's why a lot of the smaller niche kind of stores that carry particular products for a certain region are very popular because people don't want to leave their old ways. They like their ingredients and the things that they did before they came here, and they want to continue that. Consumers who retain much of their original ethnic identity differ from those who assimilate. You may have grandparents, for example, or even your own parents. They might have negative attitudes towards businesses, and they definitely watch more of their native language on television or radio. They're definitely more brand loyal, but maybe their brands aren't here. But they do prefer brands with prestige labels, and they buy brands specifically that advertise to their ethnic group. So a brand that, as I am a food marketer, that sticks out in my head is Goya, and I have a picture of them here on the right. Um, they do have international sections now in grocery stores that block off certain brands that definitely cater to different cultural groups. They don't get too in depth with a lot of their product lines. You might have to go somewhere more specific and specialty type, but at least they hit some of them up. Is ethnicity a moving target? So defining and targeting an ethnic group is not always easy because America is a melting pot. But there's this thing called de-ethnization, and it occurs when a product we associated with a specific ethnic group detaches itself from its roots and appeals to kind of the masses. So I have the example of a bagel here that's green for St. Patrick's Day. So it's typically Jewish cuisine, going over to the Irish side of a celebration. So that's called de-ethnization. The big three American ethnic subcultures. So important to know as marketers, not that you don't know this as marketers currently, but we're going to do a review. So the number one group is African Americans. They make up about 13% of the US population. Their spending habits are pretty much equal and similar to whites. Blacks and whites have roughly the same. Household income and educational levels are rising for African Americans, but we know that they are not equal at all yet. Differences in consumption behaviors are subtle but important, and there's a lot of shows, for instance, that reflect diversity. And here's an example of Doc McStuffins. The examples of niche marketing. Here are a couple of ads that I think are important for you to take a look at because they are related to the African American community. This personal care products company found that skin takes a deeper meaning for African Americans. So P&G created a program called My Black is Beautiful. So take a look at that. Ford Explorer has a commercial specifically for African Americans. And then certainly you can think of, I know Dove recently has put out a bunch of ads with all African American women. The second area that's growing is Hispanic Americans. Hispanic is an umbrella term that describes people of many different backgrounds. The largest group, of course, being from Mexican descent, but there's others that are from Puerto Rico, Central America, Dominican, South Americans, and Cubans. But things to know about the Hispanic community: they're very brand loyal. They have a high concentration by country of origin, and which means for marketing purposes, easier to reach. California, Texas, of course, Florida, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, and Colorado. So that's important if you have a product that you want to test or promote, and it definitely has more of a following from the Hispanic community. That's where you're going. Distinguishing characteristics of the Hispanic market. So looking for spirituality, they have strong family ties, and they have more color in their lives. And family is very important to them, and they do have larger family sizes. So they might spend more on groceries. They make shopping more of a family affair. Clothing is very much of a matter of pride and looking good. Convenience and saving time may not be as important to this Hispanic homemaker. And they look at themselves as ambicultural. They're somewhere between the middle of America and Latino. So they're like kind of going back and forth. So again, interesting characteristics to be aware of as a marketer. Corporations avidly court that Hispanic consumer, and certainly corporate, brands have connected with them, whether it be Kohl's with Jennifer Lopez, Macy's with Thalia Saldi, or Sodi, hopefully I'm saying that right, and of course Walmart has a Sophia line. So, this is important that that this demographic is recognized and catered to. Advertising blunders, of course. So Got Milk, there's companies out there. Now there's more companies that are focused on a specific cultural group. For instance, this ad agency that I have given you here, check this out. They are specifically focused on the Hispanic consumer. This way avoiding blunders in translation that have happened in the past, but they can still happen. So, for example, Got Milk translated to Are You Lactating? And Budweiser, instead of the King of Beers, they had down the Queen of Beers. So these are the examples of companies that, in the past were not looking at these foibles and blunders, but now they're being smarter about it, thank God, and they want to gain consumers and make sure that they know that they're connected with them and they understand their culture. So the other thing about Hispanics is that they kind of resemble this idealized concept of the 1950s America because they are very young. Many are moving to the suburbs. They live in more traditional families with that, grandparent in tow. They're community oriented. They have high aspirations for their children and education. They eat meals together and they consume less alcohol on average. So I have a picture here of kind of like the 1950s minus, all the other racism that went on. But that 1950s Americana family really has been compared to 1950s America. Let's move on to our third and final group, which are the Asian Americans. There's 20 different ethnic groups, okay? They're more affluent, they're more educated, they're brand conscious, but they're least brand loyal. They're made up of a very diverse subgroup, and they do speak many different languages and dialects of Mandarin, Korean, Japanese, and Vietnamese. Ethnic groups include Chinese, Filipino, and Japanese. They are most likely concentrated in areas like LA, New York, and San Francisco. They too have a big emphasis on family, including the grandparents, aunts, and uncles. And they're twice as likely to live with other family members than the average American. So again, from a marketing perspective, how are you marketing to this group of people differently than you would other Americans? So I always like to give you examples. I have a State Farm ad here. Check this out, funny ad, and Toyota. And again, similar mistakes have been made, like connecting with the Hispanic audience. The same thing happened with the Asian American audience. For instance, Coke's slogan, Coke adds life, was translated to Coke brings your ancestors back from the dead in Japanese. And then Kentucky Fried Chicken, finger licking good. Well, in America, that's fine sometimes, but it's not polite in Chinese. They do not lick their fingers. It is a faux pas. So again, you see how we've evolved as a society. Take a look at these great videos to get a little more in-depth connection of how advertisers are segmenting their audiences. So religion and consumption. Okay, so organized religion and product choices used to be very taboo. but now it's everything's fair game. Religious dietary restrictions and dress requirements create a demand for products. So for instance, something might be kosher. I have here the example of filet of fish Fridays in Lent for the Catholic religion. Islamic marketing is the new emerging marketing with their halal foods appealing to mainstream now. It's not just, you know, and certainly your age group is definitely more exposed to a variety of choices when it comes to food. You know, we're not just eating burgers and fries anymore. We have our palate is just so much more open to different ideas. Okay, so for reflection, I want you to think of an example of a product that is marketed based on religious consumption. Okay, hint, hint, Nike. So if we were in class, we'd have a discussion about this, but think of it on your own. Remember, I want you to think outside the box a little bit and outside. So you have a field assignment. Part of your exercise and field assignment is to discuss the changes in the modern family and what advertisers are picking up on these changes. Okay, some are doing a great job at it. So let's take a look at some of these changes. So the family unit as we know it of, you know, a mom and dad and 2.5 kids, I don't know why they always said 2.5 kids, is not what it looks like anymore. Okay, there's 3 generations living together. That's called an extended family. The nuclear family is mom, dad, and kids. Then there's many people that we call them dinks. They're voluntarily childless. Okay, people aren't having children anymore. They're having dogs. The household is more of an occupied housing unit. It doesn't mean that if just one family lives there anymore. Boomerang kids are coming in after graduation. There's a sandwich generation. That's where, you know, you're taking care of your kids, but you're also taking care of your parents as they age. Cohabitation is more and more living together without being married, and this is a huge market. I see this a lot with my family. But marketers also need to keep a close eye on birth rates, and what's coming our way is called the birth dearth. We'll get into that in just a second. So family life cycle, factors that determine how couples spend their money. Okay, so if you have a baby, obviously there's all kinds of stuff that goes with that. Whether you have both spouses working, that's called the family life cycle. The concept is trends in income and family composition with the change in demands placed on income. There's life events that happen, like a baby, marriage, death, you're moving somewhere, retirement. So all of these lead to spending money or changes in our expenditures. So back to that birth dearth I told you about. So in 2018, the U.S. experienced the fewest number of births in 32 years. Okay, so what does that mean? Is that that the birth has rate has declined, and that companies that cater to that group of people are going to be affected. I have a picture here of the Happy Meal or any other toy company. What does this suggest in trends? Okay, so if you're a company that is marketing towards a younger generation, you have to look at that's shrinking. Okay. Universities are also thinking about this, right? Their customer base is going to shrink because less people are going through onto education because there's just less people. The marketing opportunity here is almost a third of all U.S. households are owning pets now, okay? You may be one of them. 92% of those owners consider their pet a member of the family. I've got 2 dogs and a cat here, okay? I have Forrest the cat, I have Charlie the dog, and I have Lola. And as I'm saying this, they hear me saying it, and I hear them coming towards me. Okay, the industry pulls in more revenue than toy or candy industries. This is a $40 billion industry because, you know, um, people treat them like they're babies. And sometimes they're not even having children. As I said before, the pet is their child. So they're spending money on them. Literally every retail store has a pet section. Whether it's TJ Maxx, a Walmart, even go to your school bookstore. They don't have a baby section barely anymore. They have a pet section. Variables that affect our family life cycle is our age, our marital status. Are we single? This could mean an established household together of people. Children are at home. I know during COVID-19, certainly my consumption patterns have changed because I have more kids at home versus when they're at school. The ages of the children at home certainly are going to change what I purchase. So we have many things in common with others because we are about the same age. And this is a thing called an age cohort, okay? So think about how marketers target certain age cohorts. It consists of people of similar ages who have similar experiences. Okay, so here's an example. You're known as Generation Z, okay? But your experience as an older Gen Z versus someone who's 13, 12, 13, 14 is very different, whether it be music that you listen to or products that you buy or influencers that you watch or follow. So if you try to think about marketing to a certain group of people, you have to be very conscientious of when they were born. Are they an older millennial or a younger millennial? But you do have common cultural icons, certain historical events, common memories, generational categories. Okay, you guys already know all this, but it basically breaks down, and we'll start at the bottom. You have your Gen Zs, Gen Y, which is millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers, war baby generation, the silent generation, and the interbellum generation. Okay, so that's a lot. Usually in marketing, we tend to focus on baby boomers and down. Children are what we call consumers in training, and there's parental yielding. When a parent surrenders to the child's request, 90% of these requests are for brand specific items. Okay, that means that they are very aware of brands and they directly influence purchases in a family up to $453 billion a year. So marketers are aware that about this influence, and they create campaigns around the statistics, sometimes using what they call a nag factor, where the child nags or the child is trying to be smarter than the parent. I think PetSmart is doing something right now where they are promoting their pet services that you can do online, and they have a child showing the parent what to do, and it's very easy for the child. And the child rolls his eyes or her eyes, and making the parent look like, oh, what do we know? So there's kind of like going after that market. Gen Y and Gen Z have four basic conflicts in common because you're dealing with teens in some cases. So there's that autonomy versus belonging. They want to be independent, but they also want to belong. There's rebellious, but they want to conform. Idealism versus pragmatism. Adults are hypocrites. And then they're narcissistic versus intimacy. That they obsess about themselves with the pictures, and everyone needs to know about myself. So as marketers, we kind of know that there's this common angst that goes on with all teenagers, and using that information to connect with that audience is important. So getting to know Generation Z. We know you're born in the 1900s to early 2000s. You're the most diverse generation. You're digital natives, and you grew up in the Great Recession. Getting to know Gen Y. They call them the Echo Boomers or Millennials or Gen Yers. Okay, they make up 1/3 of the U.S. population and spend over $170 billion a year. They were the first to grow up with computers in their homes, and many channels on television. Their lifestyle is footloose, but they're still connected, and that's called connexity. And the three things that shaped Gen Y or millennials is the economy, they're overeducated and underpaid, and globalization. They're eager to experience cultures and social media. And that's where I said that like variety of cultures and foods are becoming more and more popular compared to other. Gen X is that consumer that is born between 1966 and 1976. There's 46 million of them out there. As we said, they're that forgotten generation, but also the MTV generation. So baby boomers, as we know, continue to be the most powerful age segment economically. They have more disposable income. Many of you have done projects using baby boomers. They're born between 46 and 64. And there's two different sets of baby boomers. There's the Vietnam War and Civil Rights baby boomer, and then they have the younger baby boomer. That's probably about 57 is the youngest baby boomer currently. Some of them may be your parents. They're active and physically fit. They're into food and they're involved with retirement programs. They do have some midlife crisis going on. But there is a big senior market out there for retirement communities, tourism, cosmetic surgery, exercise cruises, and more. So perceived age is you're only as old as you feel. You don't know this now because you're all so young, but age is more of a state of mind than a body. And so someone may have a number that they are in their 70s, but they want to dress like they're in their 50s or be active like they're in their 50s. So perceived age is how old a person feels as opposed to his or her chronological age. Feel age versus look age. The older we get, the younger we feel relative to the actual age. Consumer identity renaissance is that revitalization, previous identity, or pursuit of a long life dream. So with a lot of baby boomers, they're kind of getting into their second and third chapter of life. They may have been that kind of golden parachute where they've retired, or they were forced into retirement, but then they have that next chapter of their life, whether it be volunteering or maybe getting into golf or just working in a whole other new area that they never thought they'd get into, but it was a lifelong dream of theirs. So the values of older adults: autonomy, they want to be self-sufficient. Connectedness, they value bonds with friends and family, certainly grandchildren. And altruism is that they want to give back to the world. I think we all know this from our information that we've been studying along the way. So place-based subcultures. Geodemography combines the date the consumer on the consumer expenditures. You combine the date on the consumer expenditures with other socioeconomic factors with geographic factors. So let me break it down a little bit differently. So there's a saying that says birds of a feather flock together. So from a marketing perspective, if you're marketing a specific product or service to say retirees or baby boomers, you look for pockets of like-minded people. For instance, we all know that retirees, there's many of them in Florida, but we also know maybe that it's also a very much of a resort area, and hospitality is very big here. So that's kind of combining different pieces of information to get to your target audience. If you've ever been asked for your zip code when you go to a retailer and they say, what's your zip code? It's so that they can track and find out where their target audience is traveling from, so that they can continue to market to that zip code. Or maybe there's something that they're missing, that people are traveling from a certain area that they're not promoting to and they really need to. So if you've ever been asked, that's what it means. So this is the last slide for chapter 13. We're moving into chapter 14, our last chapter. So stay tuned and keep working in your groups and connecting these concepts to what you're working on for your group paper.